and welcome to our Tuesday sew along. I don't know if I'm by myself. So far, I haven't seen evidence that other people are on here yet, but we're going to get started. And because I know a lot of you watch the videos later, some of you watch them live, and some of you watch them on YouTube. So today we're going to be doing block number 34. It's called um, Evening Shadow. I always have to look because I get lost and forget what the name of it is. So, first of all, before we get started, last week I said I would talk about how you clean your iron. If you've got an iron that's got a little place on it that has a little bit of scorch mark on it, you run the risk of scorching your fabric if you iron with an iron that has scorch on it. You can see right here, there's a little bit of a scorch mark on that. You've got to move it up where you can see it. You can kind of see it if I hold it in the right light. The other, I have two irons, and I actually use this one probably as much or more than I do my cordless one during the week. But this has got some scorched places on it too. It's on the face plate inside the steam holes, so it doesn't touch the fabric, but you still want to clean that off if you see that. Now, there are commercial iron cleaners. Bowen makes one, Dritz makes one, and they're pretty handy. But what I have here is a Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. And I think this is like extra strength or extra magic. I'm not sure what it is. But I know that I had some that were just kind of flat, and this one kind of looks quilted. It's got little ridges in it that you probably can't see in the overhead unless I hold it just exactly right. But this is what you would do with that. Now you want to get something to protect your ironing surface. This is just a couple of my paper plates, and I've stacked them so that they're protecting my ironing surface. And then you just put a little water in your sponge in this Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. And I don't know what they put in it. I'm sure it's some kind of chemical, but I can take my iron surface and just iron my wet magic eraser. And once I get, you can see that the scorched place is disappearing. It may take several times. And I've also used just a spray bottle of water. See, it's gone. But I usually have a bottle of, just a bottle of water that I fill my irons with. And so I just poured some on my magic eraser. That's what I use most of the time to clean my iron. And there's some other options as well, but that works very well for us. So I see Sandy's on here. Oh, there's more people. So tonight's block, you saw it as I started showing how to clean the iron. This is called Evening Shadow. Now, you may have noticed there's one unit that's different. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about the center section of our evening shadow block. So I just peeled out the 6-inch center out of the center of our block. This is the economy block, and we've even done a whole project called the Economizer that was just assorted economy blocks. You might go back and look for that because it was a fun project. You can make it as big as you want or as small as you want. You just keep making blocks to put into the quilt. This is a stacked square. This is the technique sheet for stacked square. It tells you, first of all, that it's a 4-star difficulty, level of difficulty. Don't let that scare you. If you follow the instructions, you'll be fine. This lists the large square squared as the tool you need, and there's a sizing chart on the back. Now, I will tell you, unless you are making larger units, the original square squared size will work for this, and that actually is big enough for the center of our evening shadow block. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the large square squared. This is how big it would be if it was all one piece. So what they did, we have the A section. That's the part that you trim out the center of your square in a square block. The B section is your trim down section. After you get your stitching done, you trim around the whole thing. A stacked square is a square inside of a square inside of a square. So that's what we're going to make first. And because I can make it with the original size, I'm going to use that. And I will show you, I took a Sharpie marker and I marked A section on the end of my square square tool. That's my window templates for the center. I marked B section on the part that's a trim down section. And you actually use it in a little bit different way. So that's why I marked it that way. So the first thing you're going to do is do the center section. And on your chart, it tells you what size you need. If you're going to make a 6-inch unit, you're going to start with a 3.5-inch square. And basically, you don't have to trim that down. If you needed to, you could actually use the end of your ruler, the B section, and trim a 3.5-inch square. And then, because it's going to finish as a 3-inch square, I'll just show you. I'll put my ruler here. Let's do it this way. So the 3-inch square is here. So you also have a couple of blue squares, and your instructions tell you what size squares that need to be. So you're going to cut corner to corner, and then for the outer triangles, we're going to cut those in half. So we have 4 triangles of my navy and 4 triangles of my print, whatever sizes or colors you decide on. My colors are these options. So I'm going to take all of this to the sewing area and show you what I do with that next. So we have a whole bunch of hello from Oklahoma City, hello from Missouri. I know we got some hellos from Florida, so it's good to see everybody. So here is, oh, I forgot to turn off the light. Let me turn that off real quick. Now you can see. So here is our center section. And I am sewing again with my square on top next to my presser foot and my triangle on the bottom next to the feed dogs. That'll help feed through more evenly. I'm going to sew off of my fabric tag onto that corner. And then we're going to trim that. And then we're going to grab another triangle. You're going to do opposite sides of your center square. And then I tend to, if I'm not doing a bunch of these, I tend to finger press before I sew on the other 2 triangles. So I'm just going to flip this back and I'm pressing toward the triangle. And then we'll go this direction. And I'm just giving it a little finger press. Grab my triangles, and now I'm going to put them on the other side. Just center it on there. I don't have to fuss with it because it's going to get trimmed before I add the next round of triangles. So there's another triangle, and I'm guiding from my presser foot, my 1/4-inch seam allowance, and I'm using my red square as my guide. Once you get all 4 triangles on, then you're going to trim this before you add the next round of triangles. So I see I have a question from Cheryl Lynn. If you are, most machines default to 2.5. That must be what dressmakers have used for years and years. I like a 2.0 better for basic piecing. If I'm doing paper piecing, I might use a 1.8. If you get it much smaller than 1.8 and you have to take something out, it is a pain because your stitches are so tiny that it's hard to work with. So if your, some machines, I guess I should say it this way, some machines will let you change the default setting so that every time you turn it on, it sets to whatever you choose. I choose 2.0. And so that's what I've done with mine. Not every brand of machine has that feature, but if yours does have that feature, you're going to be much happier. So I am pressing all 4 of my seams. You don't want to be real heavy-handed or rambunctious with your pressing on these triangles that are on your economy center. If you're going to use the acorn pressing pin, now would be a good time to just give it a quick little swipe. Doesn't take a whole lot of the solution to do the job. And then just set the iron on there, let the iron do the work. And now we're ready to trim. So this is where we're going to be a little bit unusual. It looks like at this point, if you've used the square squared before, we would actually trim the outside edges using the end of the tool that has all the X's, the B section. But because this is actually the center of our economy block, we're going to trim this, the blue triangles, with the A section. And this is the center of a 6-inch unit. So what I'm going to do is find the center for a 6-inch finished block here on my A section of my tool. If you're using the larger one, it would be this section, and it tells you this is part A. That's the part that's your window template for cutting the center. So I'm going to use my original size. If you have the larger square squared, it will work as well. When I get these little slash marks on the intersections of my square, my red square in the center, then I know that I have that whole section centered. I also have a dashed line here, here. I have a solid line here. No, it's not solid, it's dashed all the way around. And I want to make sure that that dashed line does not go past my corners. Otherwise, I'm going to be chopping off the points of my center section for my economy block. So I trimmed 2 sides. I'm going to turn 180 degrees. Now I'm going to put my solid lines on the cut edges. Again, I'm looking at these little slash marks here, 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 and here. That goes on my intersection, so I know that I have that unit centered, and I also have the solid line that goes on my cut edges. Once I trim those 2 sides, that reserves my 1/4 inch seam allowance here, 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 and here, so that when I add my final triangles, that will be the appropriate size for what I need for my economy block. So I'm going to go back to the sewing area so you can see what we do next. Tony's cutting fabric, so she'll monitor any comments I haven't answered before we get through, or I'll go back and monitor them. But what we're going to do is line up our triangles on the sides. Now, I also have, and because of the color of thread I'm using, you can't see it, I have an intersection here where the 2 lines of stitching cross. Move that where you can see it. Where this line of stitching crosses this line of stitching, I know that's what I want to aim for when I come across here, I want to hit that intersection. So you'll be able to see it. And depending on the fabric you choose, it may be very easy to see. Mine kind of hides on the color choice I made, but I want to hit that intersection right there where the seams crisscross. And if you have trouble making sure that your seam allowances don't flip on you, I generally have my seam ripper close at hand and I can carefully place it underneath my presser foot so that I can guide my work underneath the needle and I don't worry about the seam allowance flipping on me and making a little lump that I don't want. So I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to put the next triangle on. So if you don't already own the stacked square technique sheets, we do have those available. You can order them online or you can call us and we can get them to you. They're very handy for making this economy block, but there's also several other blocks you can make with the stacked square. That's the unit that makes the monkey wrench or the snail's trail block. So it is a great technique sheet to have. There's also, for every technique sheet, there is a technique video that explains the process for how to use the sheet, how to use the chart, sizing chart. I'm giving you your sizing information for this particular size, but you may want to make it in a different size. And you can have more than just 3 layers of your stacked square. So I'm going to turn, and you saw me finger press. I'm going to turn and line this up. Ready to stitch that, and I'm looking for that same intersection where the lines of stitching here match the lines of stitching here, and where it crosses over, that's where I'm headed. And if you can make sure that your seam allowances don't flip on you without your seam ripper or stiletto, you can certainly do that. And I generally have a pair of scissors close by. You just want to make sure you don't get anything under your needle that you're going to sew into and cause yourself a problem. So we're going to put our fabric tag down and our last triangle is going on the sides. So you have to sew opposite sides and you have to press back your first pair of triangles before you add your second pair. Otherwise you're going to be unsewing. Watch several of my videos. You saw me do that one night. And I had to get the seam ripper out. Right, so I've got all of my outside triangles of my economy block stitched on. And I'm just finger pressing those before I take it to the iron. I am a great believer in finger pressing before you set the iron on it because you can pretty well see if there's any issues before you get heat to it, because once you put heat on it, it's hard to get the creases out if you have to take something out and adjust something. So we're going to go back to the overhead so you can see. First of all, I'm going to press. And since I finger pressed, I can just set the iron on it, let the iron heat it up, give it just a little swipe with my acorn pressing solution, and it won't take but just a second and it's ready to trim. So I'm going to be trimming this to 6.5 inches so that it will finish 6 inches. I can do that with my original size square squared, or if I'm using the large square squared, you're going to be using the B section this time. And I'm going to be looking for all of the 6s that have an X. That is my intersection that I'm looking for. So I can find all of those X's that have a 6 beside them. If you're using the original size and your size square squared and you're left-handed, you're going to hold your tool vertically like this. All of us righties, we're going to put all of the 6s on our intersection. They're going to disappear when I get them in the right place on my unit because of the color of my fabric and I just center it on there. I'm going to trim up and across, and I'm going to turn 180 degrees, and then I'm going to line up the 6.5-inch square lines. And it actually is the edge of my ruler here, the edge of my ruler here, the edge of my ruler here, and the line here that says 6.5. Once I get those four sides trimmed, my unit is ready for the center of my block. So that's how I arrived at the center section, the economy block. It makes a really cool center of just a basic, you could use basic flying geese. You would need a 3x6 flying goose to fit here if you were just using basic flying geese. And then whatever size flying goose you have, whatever the height of it, that's how big these squares would need to be. So before you stitch it in, this would be 3.5 by 6.5. So that is an option. Now, looking at the pattern, you can see that this unit is different. I could make all four of these units. This is actually called Bird of Paradise. And there's lots of options for how the Bird of Paradise turns out. I could make this a half square. I could make it a quarter square. I could make it a shaded 4 patch. So I just cut a little square here just to camouflage what's under it. For our block this time, we're actually going to make a shaded 4 patch. And what you're going to do is actually use, this is not going to be a wing clipper unit. This is a square squared unit, which is a little bit different. So if this is a 6.5 by 3.5-inch square, in order to have the right size center for that Bird of Paradise unit, it needs to match whatever this size is. So it's 3.5 inches. I would need to trim this to a 3.5-inch finished center using the A section. So it's I said that 3.5 inches, 3-inch finished. And I would actually need to trim that square using this center window template for a 3-inch finished block. But since I'm going to be making a little shaded 4 patch to go there, this should be review if you've watched the shaded 4 patch process before. So let's talk about how we got to the shaded 4 patch unit. It is an extra step, and if you wanted to put a plain square here instead, you would start with a 2 3/4-inch strip, and that's right on your ruler, and you would true up 4 center squares here, and then you would do the rest of the process after we get this unit done. And so you could make it just a plain square. So I've already sewn, I call them my wonky 4 patches. I've already sewn those where I have a rectangle on the end of my square, and I put them on opposite ends, and then I'm going to fold them and just snip the seam allowance. And I like to snip a thread or two past my seam across here because I want to be able to press this away from my square toward the rectangle. And because of that seam, I need to split it so this end will go toward that rectangle and this end will go toward that rectangle. And I'm going to do that with both of them. And this is the exact way we've done shaded 4 patch in the past. So if you've watched other blocks that have the shaded 4 patch unit, this is how we would do that. And your instructions will give you the size rectangles and square you need for this particular size unit. And I'm just finger pressing toward the rectangle so that I can set my iron on it, let the iron do the work. So normally you would use a tool that has a 45-degree line on it to draw lines across this. I have used the Tucker trimmer to do that, but I'm going to use just my regular 6 by 12 ruler. And the line of the seam here needs to be a 45-degree measurement. So what I'm going to do is put the 45-degree line on that seam, and I'm aiming for that intersection, and I'm going to draw my line across. It may or may not come to the corner, and that is fine because I'm going to have room to trim this to the right size. I'm going for that intersection where the two lines of stitching crisscross, and I'm putting the 45-degree line on that seam. And I generally put my pencil right on the intersection so I can get that ruler slid over into place. So I've got my lines on there. They're very faint. I draw as faintly as I can get by with and still be able to see it. So there's my intersection. If you set your pencil there or your pen there and slide your ruler so that the 45-degree line is on the seam, and then you can put your lines on fairly easily. So there's my 45, goes on on that seam line of stitching, and get it in place. And don't worry if it doesn't come into the corner because that's not going to be a problem. Then I'm going to take both of these to the sewing area, and we're going to stitch on a rectangle. So here is the rectangle I've chosen, and I'm going to buddy those up. And notice I didn't have to layer that in order to draw my lines. I drew my lines first, and now I'm going to come to the sewing area and stitch on the lines. And when I'm stitching, I want to be able to hit that intersection where the two lines of stitching cross. You can see that on your stitching. You probably can't see it as well on the camera, but I'm aiming for that intersection. And then I'm going to go all the way across. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one. And that's my intersection. Okay, nobody's screaming at me, but you should be because I didn't even put the red rectangle on it. So that's not going to do me much good. So let me grab the red rectangle. See, it's got to have that part too because I was stitching into nothing. Stitch length, yeah, we've already talked about that. Tony, you're behind time. Yeah, Tony's been busy. Okay, now, Tony didn't even see the mistake I made. We won't tell her. Okay, so then I'm ready to grab the other one. She'll figure it out. These days, I corrected myself. Occasionally, I catch my mistakes all by myself. And let me grab, I've lost my scissors. I put them over there by the cutting area. So I used my seam ripper, thread. Once I get across there, then I'm just going to slide my fabric tag underneath my needle, apart my needle, and I'm ready to go to the overhead camera. So I've got my stitching done. When you peel this open, you can see a tiny shaded 4 patch there. It's almost like magic. I'm going to put my scissors back over here where I can find them the next time I need it. Now, at this point, you're going to cut between your lines of stitching. I don't worry about having exactly a 1/4 inch in between those two. If you just cut between, you're going to have a little bit wider than a 1/4 inch, and that's always fine with me. If you're worried about it or you're making a competition quilt, yeah, you may want to put a 1/4 inch line here on this side of the seam and trim, and then turn around and put the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler on this side of the seam, and you're going to end up with a little sliver left over. it doesn't bother me that that sliver is still on the inside of this. Now, if I was hand quilting, maybe it would bother me, but my stuff generally gets machine quilted, so I don't worry too much about it. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to press toward my larger red triangle, and I'm going to finger press it first. Do that with all 4 units. And normally, if I'm making shaded 4 patch in the manner you've seen me do before, I would be using my Tucker trimmer to trim that. Since I'm actually making this as the center of my bird of paradise, I'm going to be needing to trim that differently. And this is where my squared tool is going to come in handy. This is where you just give it a quick little swipe with acorn pressing solution. And you've probably seen me stack them like this because they're going to get enough time underneath the heat for the acorn pressing solution to do its magic. And so now I'm going to be using my tool, my squared tool. If you're using the larger squared tool, you need the part A. If you're using the original, you're going to use the end of your ruler that you're actually trimming the center of a squared unit. And what we're going to do is line up the diagonal line of my squared tool on that seam. And I'm going to go the other way, and you'll see why here in a second. I need to make sure that I isolate that center point. And I'm going to trim this to a center square for 3-inch finished units. What I'm going to be looking for is right at that seam. I want to be able to cut right along there. The diagonal line should go right through the corner of my square, and I want this side to line up on the line of my seam on this side, so that when I trim up and over, and then I turn 180 degrees, again, I'm going to put the diagonal line right through the corner of my square. That actually puts the edge of that solid line for the 3-inch finished blocks right on my cut edges. And when I cut, it should cut right at the seam line so that this comes down to a sharp point. And you're going to do that with all of them. This is for the center of a 3-inch finished unit. So I don't have to worry about what size it would be with the Tucker trimmer. I am simply looking for this diagonal line, and I'm looking for right at the center for 3-inch finished blocks. That corner needs to be right on the seam. And I'm going to trim 2 sides, turn and trim the other 2 sides. And did you notice that I trimmed from the other side first? It doesn't really matter as long as you have 3 things lined up properly. The 3 things you're looking for is the center diagonal line on the corner of your square and the edge of the center for a 3-inch finished block right at the seam, so that you end up with a perfect unit to go in the center of your 3-inch finished unit. So I'm sliding, first of all, over to the edge where the line for the 3-inch finished block lines up right on that seam. The center line lines up on the center square, and this is the center for a 3-inch finished block. It's an ugly measurement. If I told you to get your regular ruler and trim this, you really would be mad at me, because it's probably a measurement that's not even on your ruler, because the mathematics of a square to go inside a square in a square is a little ugly. But with this tool, I don't even have to think about it. I'm just lining up right here, and right here. And once I get that in place, I can trim up over, turn, and line up the lines for the 3-inch, the center square for 3-inch blocks. Once I get that done, I've got the center of my unit trimmed to the proper size. So that's what I'm after. The way you're going to get the other pieces on this are a little bit different, because normally if we're doing flying geese, we have a formula for doing that. But for these units, there's my center of my bird of paradise. My first step is to take 2 squares that are, I'm going to give it just a little bit of a press because there's a crease across there and I think it'll be easier. I'm going to take my squares in the appropriate size and I'm going to cut corner to corner both directions. Now they are a little bit oversized, which is what I want because they're going to get trimmed, but they're going to actually go right there on my units. And then my squares that are going to become my big triangles on this flying goose shape, I'm going to take my squares, and I have the appropriate size on your cutting directions. I have 4 of them stacked here. This only has to be cut once. The white one, whatever color you chose for that position, gets cut twice. But this one just cuts diagonally once. I'm going to take all of this to the sewing area, and I'm going to take one of these because I'm going to show you how it helps you line up what you need to be stitching. So we're going to turn our needle camera on. In fact, I'm going to go this way so you can see. So there's the unit we're after. And here is one of my little shaded 4 patches in the proper size. And I've got my triangles that are going to go here. And they're actually going to be touching my red square or my red triangle. I'm just going to lay these aside for a minute because I don't need them yet. I'm going to grab all 4 of my little shaded 4 patch units that I've trimmed using my squared tool. And I'm going to use my triangle. It's going to line up on the corner here. And I've got the little ear sticking out on the bottom. Now, it's actually going to get trimmed later, so I'm not too worried about placement. I just line it up, and I'm going to have a little bit of an ear sticking out. I want to put my little shaded 4 patch unit on top because you always want to put what's already cut to size on top where you can attend to it and make sure it's lined up on the edge of your presser foot. So I can do assembly line style. I want to make sure that this corner matches up. If you need to pin it, that is fine. I want to make sure that that comes to the corner. It's going to get trimmed, but I do want it to be as precise as possible. Again, I'm putting my square, my little shaded 4 patch on top. And I would just do assembly line style, all 4 of them. I'm going to do that real quick so you can see how that works. So here's how that's going to fit. Notice I've got some holes where the selvage is. That's actually going to get trimmed off in the seam allowance, so I'm not going to worry about it because you are going to have a little bit of trimming room on this unit. I'm going to give it a little pin, line that up on the bottom. I've got one more to do. Oh, there it is. I started saying I've lost my triangle, but there it is. If you don't feel like you need to pin, that's fine. As a general rule, I probably don't on this particular step, but some people are more secure pinning their seams together, and that's fine. You could also use the seam aligned glue It's an Acorn product and it works very well. It's very lightweight. So that's also an option for you. All right, so we're going to just clip these apart and I'm going to take those pins out. Notice I just carefully sewed over the pins, but that is something you need to be cautious about. So there's one side and I'm going to press away from my little shaded 4-patch unit. My other side needs to be here, like that. But I'm going to be sewing again from the side where my shaded 4-patch is. So I'm matching up this top corner and letting that little tail just hang off where it's going to hang. And I'm going to line that up right along the edge and stitch using my presser foot as my guide. And I'm going to do that with all 4 sections, but the first step is to finger press the first triangle that you added. You're going to line this up, and I would use the picture either on the picture that's on your pattern, um, the picture that's on the technique sheet, something to just remind you of the orientation of all of the pieces and parts of this unit. So this one's going to go here. I'm going to just flip it over so that I can feed it through with my shaded 4-patch on top. Did I have more questions that I didn't answer, Tony? And there's my last triangle. Finger press it. And that's where that's going to go, except I want to make sure I get the right side together. Sometimes the fabric, if you're not paying attention, it's hard to tell at a glance which is the right side and which is the wrong side. So you do want to be aware of that. So I'm going to grab my fabric tag, park my needle, and I'm going to clip these apart. Now, if you're making 1,000 of these, I might consider taking them to the iron and pressing them. But since I'm only making a set of 4, I'm going to finger press it and I'm not going to take it to the iron for a couple of reasons. Because I've got a bias edge exposed here, that's these edges right here, sometimes you can distort it by taking it to the iron before you get something here to enclose it. So I'm not going to take that to the iron. I'm just going to finger press it. But notice when I finger press, I just do little short strokes. I don't want to start over here and just rip my fingernail across there. Otherwise, I can distort the first seam I just added. So I'm just going to line that up, stack them up, and they'll get trimmed later. But I've got them ready to add that final triangle. So here's where these triangles go. All right. So I want to, I'm going to put them over here so you can see just one of them. That's what's going here. And notice they're oversized. That's the way I want it. But the easiest way to line this up to stitch it is to put this section on top. Because again, this part's already been trimmed. This is going to get trimmed. But I want to line up. And I'm going to line up at this bottom corner. See where I'm pointing. This is where I'm going to line up. It's going to hang over the top here, but that's what gives me the wiggle room to trim later. So I'm going to line that up and I'm going to pin it just to tame it. But I'm going to start stitching from this side. And I just want this to lay down nice and smooth without pulling or tugging on anything. And I'm going to stitch all the way across. You know, lift this up just a hair. Remember, you can, if you don't want to do the little shaded 4-patches, you can look at the technique sheet for the Bird of Paradise and you can actually put the a plain square in that position. So I'm going to pin the end of it so that just tames the point. I'll line that up, and I'm going to start stitching onto the part of that triangle that's sticking out at the top. Just going to do a couple of these because I want to have time to show you how you trim them. So I've got the first triangle on. Let me grab my fabric tag. I would, of course, keep going and do all 4 of them, but I want to have time to show you options for trimming. So I've got my pin here. I'm going to get rid of that. And again, I'm going to press toward my triangle, and I'm going to finger press it. Just easily give it short little strokes, because this whole seam of the red triangle is a bias edge, and the edge of the white triangle is a bias edge. So I don't want to just slide my finger along that and be real heavy handed with finger pressing. So that's why I just give it quick little, about a ½ inch strokes at a time to keep it all tamed. So now this time, here's the triangle that's going to fit. Again, I want to match up here and let the other end of my triangle just fall where it falls. That ear is going to stick out. If you feel the need to pin here, you could. I'm not going to, because it's going to get started together, and I just let it feed through because I'm going to trim it later. I'm after that intersection right there, but that's the only place I really have to pay close attention to in order to make sure that I get that intersection met with my needle. And I'm lining up. Any of you use a stiletto? I generally don't, but that's probably because I always have my my handy dandy seam ripper, or I also use these bent tip tweezers a lot. I'm lining up right here, and I'm sewing with my little shaded 4-patch unit on top. And a lot of times, if I have things that need assistance guiding through, I'll use my bent tip tweezers, and I can stitch quite a few units just holding this in my hand as I go, because I can grab just one layer of fabric and pull it into place. These, these are a tool that we sell a lot. They work really great if you're doing curved piecing. Started using them. But that also allows me to be able to put the bent tip tweezers up almost to my needle without worrying about stitching over it. But if you stitch over these, you are going to bust your needle, just saying. So I'm going to grab my fabric tag and park my needle so I have my units all complete, ready to trim. So we're going to clip there, and we're going to the overhead camera. Any questions so far? I must be explaining it really well because nobody's asking questions. All right, so I've got my ironing surface here. I'm going to finger press first this last triangle. And once I get that in place, I'm going to set the iron on it, let the iron do the work. And notice I had finger pressed this first triangle. I had finger pressed here and here. This is the first time I brought this unit to the iron since I started with my shaded 4-patch. So I'm going to just grab my acorn pressing pin and do all of the diagonal seams just to help flatten them out. And then I'll do that again. I'm going to finger press first. Move it up a little bit so you can see it. And I've also finger pressed that a minute ago before I sewed the red triangles on. Then just give it a quick little swipe with the acorn pressing solution. By the way, if this is your first experience using the acorn pressing solution, you may or may not see it when you swipe it down your seam. And that's okay because it's there doing the job. It doesn't take a lot of it to be able to see good results from it. So here is my little bird of paradise. And remember, you could choose to put a plain square here and it still would be an attractive block. It's a little bit different technique. You would still trim this square unit using the A section for a 3-inch finished block if you decide to do that. And I made my little shaded 4 patches. I didn't worry about how big that was supposed to be. I just used my center square for 3-inch block to trim it. Now, you actually have options for how to trim the outside edges of your Bird of Paradise unit. So the technique sheet shows you how to use the square tool. If you're using the large one, you're going to be using the B section. And if you're using the original size, you're still going to be using the B section. And I've marked mine. I would recommend you mark yours. And what I'm going to be looking for is this top intersection and the diagonal lines that are connected. This is a 3 by 6 inch unit. And I can put that intersection that says 6 on the top here, following this seam down to the 6 here, following this seam down to the 6 here. That is the appropriate placement for trimming this Bird of Paradise unit. I'm wanting to make sure that I reserve the seam allowance at the tip here, which I have done by the way I placed it. Now this time, I've got a couple of things to look for. I'm also looking for that X where the 6 is. That's going to go on my little shaded 4 patch base. I'm going to be looking also for the edge of my 6.5 inch square. And I'm looking for the 3.5 inch line here to line up on the base of my Bird of Paradise unit. So here, here, and the number 6 where the X is. Once I get that lined up, I also am looking for the dashed lines here connected with the 6. And I know that's the appropriate placement for that shaded 4 patch. And notice it has a perfect 1/4 inch here, perfect 1/4 inch here. The seams go right down into the corners the way I want it. So it is possible, say you've got this ready to trim and you can't find your squared tool. It could happen. You could actually use the wing clipper as well. And in order to do that, you're going to line up the 6.5 inch line. Let me show you on the ruler first. This line, you're going to point the valley toward you. And we're actually kind of ignoring this right now. But this line and this line are going to line up on the long diagonal here and the long diagonal attached to the 6.5 inch line. Once I get that in place, I'm also going to notice that because of the way this is constructed, I have a bold X right at the tip of my little shaded 4 patch unit. So I could use the wing clipper tool, trim 2 sides and turn and trim the other 2 sides. The instructions actually, though, I put the wrong thing over here, use this tool, the B section, put the 6X at the tip, line up all the way down to the 6 on both diagonal seams, and we're going to give that just a little tweaking. We're going to trim up, over. That reserves my seam allowance here. Turn 180 degrees. Line up on the 6.5 inch line here, the 3.5 inch line here, and the 6X on the tip. And once you get that placement, then you're ready to trim up and over. And you don't have a whole gob that you're trimming away, but it gives the seam right down in the corner where it belongs here. It reserves a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here, so that when you put this in your block, it's going to line up where it belongs. So that is the block called Evening Shadow. You could actually flip this around and create a completely different block, because remember, you don't have to make your placement like my placement is. This reminds me of a ball field. first base, second base, third base, home plate. So you could do that this way. This also has just a plain corner. So that is an option for you as well. And you could put a half square here. You could put an hourglass here. You could put a 4 patch here. There are other options for what you are going to put in the corner. So any questions from anybody? Well, I appreciate that, Cheryl. And she says I explain things well. So I try. And what we're going to do next week will be, I better not tell you the number because I haven't looked ahead yet, because we're not doing every one of the blockbuster patterns. But next week, live at 5, join us live or later. You can watch them from our Facebook page or from our YouTube channel and come and see us. We can provide for you all of the technique sheets, all of the patterns. And there is a new pattern. I was going to get it out and I can't remember. It was a split Rex pattern. And I think there's another new one beyond that. But we try to keep up with all of the new patterns Deb and her team are designing for you. So until next week, happy sewing. Come and see us.